What would you do if the very people sworn to protect your neighborhood tried to destroy you instead? If the same organization that promised order and safety suddenly turned their power against you? That's the question I asked myself the morning I opened a plain white envelope and saw $50,000 printed in red ink. I remember the sound of the envelope tearing. Just another piece of mail, I thought. I had set it down on the kitchen counter next to my coffee, planning to look at it later. The house was quiet, except for the soft ticking of the old wall clock, and I thought I had nothing more pressing to do that day than mow the yard and maybe tighten the squeaky hinge on the back gate. Retirement was supposed to be about peace. But the second I slid that paper out and unfolded it, my hands began to tremble. Fine assessment, $50,000. I blinked, thinking maybe I was still half asleep. 50,000? I read it again and again. Each time the number didn't change, my stomach twisted in a way I hadn't felt since the day I lost my father. For a moment I thought it had to be a typo, maybe 500, still outrageous but survivable, but 50,000 for what? The answer came in a single line typed in bold: unauthorized construction, alteration of community water flow. The dam. I sat down hard at the kitchen table. For years, the creek behind our cul-de-sac had turned our yards into swamps every spring. George, my neighbor, had lost a brand-new mower last year when the water came rushing in. Flower beds were wiped out like clockwork. I complained. We all complained. The HOA sent letters back, always the same excuse. Large-scale solutions are cost-prohibitive. In other words, not our problem. So I built the solution myself. I'm no engineer, but I'm an electrician. I know how to build things that last. It took me months: concrete, rock, steel reinforcement, but when the next storm came, the creek swelled and then slowed. The water drained away exactly where it was supposed to. For the first time in years, our yard stayed dry. George brought me a bottle of whiskey to thank me. Said I'd saved her thousands. I thought maybe I'd done a good thing. But in my hands now was a letter signed by Graves, HOA president. A woman who seemed to get joy out of measuring lawns with a ruler and scolding kids for riding bikes without helmets. She stood behind every rule with a grin that said, "Because I can." I'd seen her wagging that clipboard around like it was a sword, but I never thought she'd come for me this way. The fine was wrapped in threats: liens on my property, interest compounding daily. If I didn't pay within 30 days, they would take further action. Stapled to the back were copies of so-called county permits. Blurry, crooked signatures smudged like they'd been a dozen times. My gut told me they were fake. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. A terrible mistake. Surely a phone call would clear it up. I dialed the HOA number, which was just house phone, and she answered on the second ring. Her voice was sharp, impatient, the kind that makes you feel like you're already guilty. "There's no mistake, Mr. Miller," she said sweetly. "You built an unauthorized structure in direct violation of community water regulations. The fine stands." I tried to reason with her. I told her the rules she cited didn't exist. I told her the dam was working, that my neighbors were happy. She cut me off. "We are not governed by what makes your friends happy. We are governed by the rules. The fine is $50,000. Pay it, or we'll take further action." And then the line went dead. I sat there staring at the phone in my hand. The room was suddenly too quiet, except for the faint creak of the back gate outside in the wind. That gate had been squeaking for years, but now it sounded ominous, like the whole world was whispering, "You're in trouble." I wanted to believe she was bluffing, that it was just a scare tactic, but the cold weight in my chest told me otherwise. I looked down at that letter again, at those fake-looking permits, and I realized this wasn't about a rule violation. This was an attack. And if thought I'd roll over, she was about to find out she had picked the wrong man. What would you do if someone forged the law to break you? If the documents in your mailbox weren't just lies, but lies dressed up to look official? That was the thought eating at me as I stared at so-called permits under the dim kitchen light. The county seal looked wrong, skewed like a bad photocopy. I pulled up the real seal on my laptop, and the difference was glaring. The one had stapled to her letter was a forgery. She hadn't just written up a fake violation. She had tried to weaponize government paperwork to squeeze $50,000 out of me. My disbelief curdled into anger. This wasn't about landscaping rules or mailbox paint. This was fraud. and thought she could get away with it because I was just one man at the end of a cul-de-sac. I refused to panic. Instead, I did what I had always done as an electrician. I got organized. If there's a fault in the system, you trace every line until you find it. So I started tracing. I pulled out old HOA letters admitting flooding was a known issue. I dug through years of photos, every muddy spring where the creek turned our yards into swamps. My wife had videos of our grandkids sinking their boots into the soggy grass. I printed them all out, labeling each by date. Evidence doesn't lie. But I knew I needed more than pictures. So I set up a small wildlife camera on a pole overlooking the dam, a quiet witness that watched 24 hours a day. A week later, nature gave me exactly what I needed. A thunderstorm rolled in. Rain hammered the roof, the gate outside clanged in the wind, and I sat in my kitchen watching the live feed. The water rose against the dam, swirling with pressure. My stomach tightened, but it held, perfectly. The overflow channel carried the excess runoff into the woods exactly as I'd designed. By morning, the yards were dry, the creek calmed. I saved every second of footage, proof. With my folder growing thicker, I decided to reach out again, not to, but to a board member named David. He was quieter, not like her. I emailed him photos, the video, even a side-by-side of the real county seal next to forgery. My message was calm, professional. David, the dam works. The documents are fake. Please reconsider. An hour later, my phone rang. David's voice was low, shaky, like he was whispering from a closet. Jack, listen, you're not wrong. But you need to be careful, doesn't back down. She sees this as a challenge to her authority. I asked him flat out if the board knew she was committing fraud. The silence on the other end stretched long. Then he muttered, the board mostly does what wants. My advice, take the dam down. It's not worth the fight she'll bring to your door. And then he hung up. I sat there staring at the receiver again, my heart pounding. It was confirmation of everything I suspected. Even the board knew. But they were afraid of her, afraid of the woman with a stack of fake papers and a poisonous smile. 2 days later, she made good on David's warning. I was in my garage sharpening a blade when I heard tires crunching on gravel. A sheriff's deputy pulled into my driveway, lights off, car clean as if polished for intimidation. He stepped out, tall, professional, but his eyes flat, like the verdict was already decided. Are you Jack Miller? I wiped grease off my hands and nodded. He handed me a folded document. Cease and desist. You have 48 hours to begin immediate removal of the unpermitted structure. His voice was clipped, official, like he'd rehearsed it. My throat tightened. Deputy, this is a civil matter. The HOA is using forged. He cut me off. Sir, I'm not here to debate. If the structure is not removed, they can file for an injunction. You could be held in contempt. That thing comes down or we'll be back, and you won't like the next visit. And with that, he turned and left. No handshake, no discussion, just the thud of his boots on my driveway, the slam of a cruiser door, and then silence. I stood there, the papers shaking in my hand. 48 hours to destroy the one thing keeping my home safe. My house, the place I'd lived for 30 years, suddenly felt like it wasn't mine at all. That night, sitting in the dark, I thought about giving in. Maybe I should. Tear the dam down, pay what I could, beg for mercy. But the thought made me sick. Because if I gave in, if I rewarded her lies, what would stop her from doing it again? To me, to George, to anyone. No, if wanted a war, she was about to get one. But I couldn't fight alone. I needed help. I needed an expert. And I knew exactly who to call. What kind of person forges laws to win a neighborhood squabble? That question burned in my head as I stared at the cease and desist papers on my kitchen table. 48 hours. That's all the time I had before I'd be branded a criminal for refusing to destroy my own dam. My hands shook when I touched the pages, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was fury. Fury that one woman with a fake seal and a smug grin could twist the system to her will. I knew then that I couldn't face this alone. I needed someone smarter, someone who wouldn't flinch. So I called Maya. We worked side by side for nearly 2 decades at the power plant. While I wrangled high-voltage lines, she was the one engineers turned to when foundations cracked or blueprints didn't add up. Civil engineer, calm under pressure, no nonsense. She, saved the plant more than once by catching flaws others missed. If there was anyone who could dismantle web of lies, it was Maya. When she arrived the next morning, I already had everything spread across my dining room table. The $50,000 fine notice, the fake permits, the threatening letters, the deputy's cease and desist. My folder of photos, receipts, security footage stills. Even the comparison printout of the real county seal next to forged one. Maya didn't speak for nearly half an hour. She just put on her glasses, flipped through each page, and frowned deeper with every forgery she spotted. Finally, she gave a sharp laugh. "Jack, this is sloppy. Look at this." She tapped her pen against the forged permit. Different font sizes, misspelled regulation code, they didn't even try. Hearing her say it out loud was a strange relief. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. The president of our HOA had committed fraud and done it badly. We stepped out back and she inspected the dam herself. She ran her hands along the concrete, measured the reinforcement, studied the flow of the creek. She crouched, listening to the water gurgling through the runoff channel. Finally, she straightened, brushed the dust from her knees, and looked me square in the eye. "This isn't just a pile of rocks, Jack. This is a proper gravity weir, solid design. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do." Her words hit me like a surge of electricity. For weeks, I'd been made to feel like a criminal, like I'd endangered my neighbors. Now, with one expert nod, the weight lifted. I wasn't wrong. I wasn't reckless. I'd built something that worked. But Maya didn't stop there. "Photos aren't enough," she said firmly. "If we're going to fight this, we need data, hard numbers, logs, proof no one can argue with." So we turned my backyard into a science project. We installed a water gauge behind the dam, used my wildlife camera to capture water levels during storms, recorded the creek's height every single hour. Maya even built a spreadsheet charting rainfall against water flow. For 2 straight days, we logged, measured, documented. She drew diagrams, typed up findings, and stamped the report with her official engineering license. Her conclusion was crystal clear. The dam was not only safe, it actively prevented property damage and posed zero risk to the community. Holding that report in my hands felt like gripping a sword. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had more than anger. I had armor. Together, we drafted a demand letter to the board. Simple, polite, but firm. We attached Maya's report, the data logs, the side-by-side of the forged seals, and a request. Drop the fine, rescind the cease and desist, and issue a formal apology. We sent it certified mail with a receipt so they couldn't pretend it got lost. Then we waited. I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be the end. That faced with undeniable proof and an expert's stamp, they'd retreat, embarrassed but cornered. A week later, another envelope slid under my door. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside wasn't an apology, it wasn't even a negotiation. It was a brand new fine. $10,000. The reason? Unauthorized surveillance device. They were fining me for the little wildlife camera pointed at my own dam. Attached was another forged document, citing a non-existent bylaw. I stared at it in disbelief. They hadn't backed down, they had doubled down. But this time, arrogance had stirred something in the neighborhood. George saw the deputy's car in my driveway, whispered that she'd heard about the new fine. When I showed George the letter, he slammed his fist on the table. "That's it, I've had enough of her." That evening, he went door to door, speaking to the other homeowners whose yards had flooded for years. And by the next morning, he was back at my doorstep with a sheet of paper in his hands. A signed statement of support. Every neighbor on our side of the cul-de-sac had signed it, testifying that the dam had solved the flooding problem, confirming that my camera was pointed only at my property. I wasn't fighting alone anymore. What would you do if your enemy started watching you every second of the day? If the person trying to destroy your life mounted cameras aimed straight into your yard? That's what I saw when I stepped outside one morning and looked up at the streetlight. 2 brand new security cameras, both pointed directly at my home. One aimed at my front door, the other zoomed in on the dam. It was brazen, creepy. An intimidation tactic as clear as day. Wasn't just fining me anymore. She was telling me, "I own you. I see everything you do." I called Maya, my voice tight with frustration. She didn't sound rattled at all. "She's trying to provoke you, Jack. Don't take the bait. Document it, that's all." So that's what I did. I adjusted my own wildlife camera slightly. Now, in addition to logging water levels, it had a perfect view of the lamppost and new toys. If she wanted to watch me, I was going to watch her right back. It didn't take long for her arrogance to betray her. A week later, an unmarked white van pulled up to the lamppost. A man in plain work clothes climbed a ladder, fiddling with the camera. A few minutes later, car rolled up. She got out, handed the man a piece of paper, gestured toward my yard. Their body language told the whole story. This wasn't official HOA business. This was personal, and I caught every second on film. 2 days later, another violation notice hit my mailbox. This time, $5,000 for unsecured construction materials. Attached was a blurry photo of my wheelbarrow and 2 bags of concrete mix sitting outside my shed. Timestamped that morning. But there was one problem. The bags weren't there. I had put them inside the shed the night before. I knew it. And sure enough, when I checked my own footage, the truth stared me in the face. At 6:15 in the morning, car crept past my house. Stopped. A silhouette in the driver's seat lingered for a moment before moving on. The photo she submitted was staged. A lie. I had her cold. But she wasn't finished. One afternoon, as I checked on my vegetable garden, Tom's loyal enforcer came striding across my lawn. Tom was a big man, heavy-footed, a former security guard who loved the feeling of authority. He didn't even say hello. "Sent me, we need to inspect the dam again. Reports of it leaking." I swallowed my anger and played along. "Sure, Tom, take a look." He stomped around, poked at the rocks with his shoe, jotted something on a clipboard, and left after less than a minute. That evening, I got another email from the HOA, a brand new violation, $5,000 for structural instability. Attached was Tom's so-called inspection report, signed and official-looking. But Tom hadn't inspected a damn thing. I had been recording with my phone in my pocket the whole time. 30 seconds of aimless stomping and leaving. No measurements, no real notes. Combined with the video from my camera, the lie was obvious. Thought she was building a case against me, but all she was really doing was giving me more evidence. Piece by piece, her entire campaign was starting to collapse under its own weight. Still, the harassment spread like poison. George got a warning for his grass being half an inch too tall, was cited for having the wrong shade of black on her mailbox. Every neighbor who signed my support letter found themselves targeted. It was petty, vindictive, and it worked. People grew quiet. They stopped talking to me openly. A nod at the mailbox, maybe a sympathetic glance, but no one wanted to be next on her list. Fear was sinking its teeth into the community. That night, I sat at my desk and thought hard. This wasn't just about me anymore. Was ruling through fear, one notice at a time. And the only way to fight fear is with knowledge. So I wrote up a simple 1-page guide. I called it the HOA harassment log. Step 1, save every email. Step 2, take time-stamped photos of whatever they cite. Step 3, write down every phone call, every interaction with the date and time. I printed out 20 copies, and after dark I walked the neighborhood and slipped one into each of my supportive neighbors' mailboxes. Quietly, carefully. I didn't know if anyone would use it, but I had to try. The next morning, the sound of tires crunching on gravel returned. Blue and red lights flashing against my windows. Deputy again. And this time was standing beside him, arms crossed, that same smug grin on her face. My chest tightened as the deputy walked up to my porch. His hand rested on his sidearm. "Mr. Miller," he said coldly. "We're here because Graves is filing a criminal complaint against you for trespassing." I blinked. Trespassing on my own property. He held up a paper, another forged document, a map redrawn to claim the dam was on HOA land. Had escalated to her boldest lie yet. She wasn't just fining me anymore. She was trying to have me arrested. And for the first time in my life, I felt the terrifying possibility that she just might succeed. What would you do if the law itself turned against you? If a judge you had never met signed away your freedom based on forged papers slipped under his nose? That's exactly what I was facing. Trespassing complaint wasn't just a scare tactic. She used it to file for an emergency injunction. And without ever hearing my side of the story, a judge signed an order. I had 72 hours to completely remove the dam. If I failed, I would be held in contempt and could be jailed. The paper felt heavier than stone in my hands. I'd worked 30 years as an electrician, never had so much as a speeding ticket. And here I was, 63 years old, being told I could go to jail for standing on my own property. That night, I barely touched my dinner. My wife Sarah sat across the table, her fork clinking against her plate. She'd been my rock through all of this, but I saw something in her eyes that I hadn't before: fear. "Jack," she whispered, her voice trembling, "maybe it's time to give up. Pay the fine, tear it down, it's not worth going to jail." Her words cut deeper than letters ever could, because I knew she wasn't wrong. The fight was bleeding us dry, financially, emotionally, even socially. Neighbors who used to wave now crossed the street. The HOA newsletter had painted me as a reckless homeowner who endangered everyone, and people believed it. Whispers followed me when I got the mail. I sat up late, staring at that injunction on the table. The house was quiet, except for the groan of the old refrigerator and the ticking of the clock. I thought about my father, about the lessons he'd drilled into me. Fix what's broken, stand your ground, don't let bullies win. But what happens when the bully holds the law in her hand? By morning, the decision settled in my chest like lead. I couldn't risk jail, not for me, for Sarah, for my family. So I made the hardest call of my life: I would comply. I hired a local contractor with a small excavator. The day he arrived, the sky was gray, the air damp with the smell of rain. Each bite of the machine's bucket tore at my gut. The dam I had spent months building crumbled in minutes. Concrete shattered, rocks tumbled, water rushed through unrestrained. I took a photo of the wreckage with my phone, not as a keepsake, but as evidence. Proof I had obeyed the court order. I sent the photo to the HOA with a short email. "The structure has been removed per the court order." No reply, no satisfaction, just silence. Didn't need to gloat, she'd already won. But life has a way of turning the tables when you least expect it. That very night, the skis opened up. Not a drizzle, not a passing shower, a storm. Heavy, pounding rain that hammered the roof and rattled the windows. All night it fell, relentless. I lay awake, listening, knowing in my gut what would happen now that the dam was gone. At dawn, my phone buzzed. It was George. His voice was frantic. "Jack, you have to see this." I pulled back the curtains and froze. The creek was unrecognizable, a raging brown river, higher than I'd ever seen it. My backyard was a lake, water climbing up the porch steps. George's yard was worse. Muddy waves lapped at the wheels of his brand-new mower. His patio furniture floated like driftwood. The dam had been the only thing holding it all back, and now it was gone. I stepped outside into the rain-soaked air, the smell of wet earth thick and sour. Neighbors stood on porches, staring in disbelief as water swallowed gardens and sheds. For years, they'd begged the HOA to do something. I had done it myself, and forced me to tear it down. The whispers shifted overnight. No one was accusing me anymore. They were asking why the HOA had destroyed the one thing protecting them. I stood in the mud, the rain dripping off my jacket, and felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Resolve. Thought this was checkmate. But what she had really done was hand me the most undeniable proof yet. Because the neighborhood wasn't just angry anymore. They were wet, they were muddy, they were furious. And I still had every photo, every forgery, every piece of evidence. The dam was gone, but the fight was only just beginning. What would you do if your enemy's victory destroyed everyone around them? If their lies finally crumbled under the weight of the truth? Not in a courtroom, but in muddy backyards. That's what I saw the morning after the storm. The creek had swallowed half the cul-de-sac. George's brand-new mower was ruined, its engine drowned in silt. His patio furniture bobbed in the filthy water like abandoned boats. My yard was a swamp, the vegetable garden buried under a layer of stinking mud, and the whispers around the neighborhood had shifted. For weeks, people avoided me, afraid of wrath. But now they stood on their porches with arms crossed, staring at the mess, asking the same question. Why did the HOA force Jack to tear down the one thing protecting us? This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was a community staring disaster in the face and realizing exactly who was responsible. I didn't waste time. I grabbed my camera. I filmed the floodwaters rising, the damage to George's mower, the mud lines on walls. I took hundreds of photos, time-stamped and clear. For 2 days, I documented everything, from the moment the rain began to the slow, painful retreat of the water. Every image was proof. Every frame told the real story. Obsession with power had caused this. But evidence sitting in a folder wasn't enough anymore. I needed eyes on it, not just neighbors, the whole city. So I picked up the phone and called the local news station. I asked for the investigative desk, the team that dug into government scams and shady contractors. I left a message, short and sharp. My name is Jack Miller. My HOA used forged documents to fine me $50,000 and forced me to tear down a flood control dam. Now the neighborhood is underwater. I have all the proof. I didn't know if anyone would call me back, but within an hour, a reporter named Sarah did. Her voice was skeptical at first, the way reporters are when they've heard too many tall tales. Mr. Miller, that's a serious accusation. You said you have proof. I have everything, I told her. Every fake document, every threatening letter, security footage, an engineer's report, and a backyard full of mud. By the next day, Sarah and her cameraman were standing in my dining room. My evidence was spread across the table like a war map. I didn't rant. I didn't shout. I walked her through it calmly, one piece at a time. The forged county seal, compared side by side with the real one. The video of the dam working perfectly during a storm. The phony fine for my wildlife camera. The staged wheelbarrow violation, caught by my own footage. The audio recording of Tom pretending to inspect the dam. And finally, the trespassing complaint with the redrawn property line next to the real plat map proving the dam was entirely on my land. Sarah's skepticism melted into shock. She scribbled furiously, her eyes wide as I laid each forgery on the table. She forged all of this, she asked, and the police acted on it. They did, I said. They never asked for my side, they just believed her. Then I took her outside. The flood damage was everywhere. George's destroyed mower, ruined patio, thick lines of mud caked against our houses. George agreed to speak on camera. Their voices cracked with anger as they described years of pleading with the HOA, only to watch their homes go underwater once the dam was gone. Sarah's cameraman captured it all, the devastation, the evidence, the raw frustration on our faces. At the end of the interview, Sarah turned her microphone toward me. What do you want to see happen? I looked straight into the lens, my voice steady but hard. I want the fines dropped. I want my neighbors compensated. And I want the people who did this held accountable. An HOA president shouldn't be able to destroy lives with fake documents and lies. 2 nights later, the story aired on the 6 o'clock news, and it hit like a bomb. The forged permits flashed across the screen, zoomed in for everyone to see. The video of my dam holding back a storm played next, followed by shots of the flooded yards. Sarah even caught outside a grocery store. The camera cornered her mid-step. She stammered everything, blamed me, but the footage painted her as defensive and untrustworthy. By morning, my phone was ringing nonstop. Strangers from across the city called with their own HOA horror stories. The news station's Facebook page was swamped with comments supporting me. People weren't just angry, they were furious at the idea that someone could abuse power so blatantly. The private war tried to bury had just exploded into a public scandal. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the tide turning in my favor. What would you do if your entire neighborhood finally saw the bully for who she really was? If years of whispered fear erupted into one crowded room? That's what happened 2 nights after the news story aired. The HOA board called an emergency meeting. Normally, those gatherings were sleepy affairs. A half-dozen homeowners, stale coffee in styrofoam cups, at the head of the table barking about trash bins. But that night, the clubhouse was packed wall to wall. People I hadn't spoken to in years stood shoulder to shoulder, clutching copies of old newsletters and violation notices. You could feel the tension humming in the air like a live wire. The board sat at their long table in front. Most of them looked pale, nervous. All except. She sat ramrod straight in the middle, lips pursed, her clipboard clutched like a shield. If she felt the walls closing in, she didn't show it. When the meeting was called to order, she tried to carry on like nothing had happened. First order of business, landscaping maintenance. She didn't get 2 words out. George shot to his feet from the front row, voice sharp as a crack of thunder. We're not talking about landscaping. We're talking about fraud. We're talking about the half a foot of mud in my brand new shed. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. A woman from the next street stood up, holding a wrinkled violation letter in her fist. And what about the $500 fine I got for a dead patch of grass during a drought? Was that a real rule, or did you make that up too? The room erupted. Voices overlapped, one story after another, petty fines, forged papers, threats. People who had been silent for years were suddenly shouting, their frustration boiling over. Banged her gavel, her voice sharp. Order, order in this meeting. But no one listened. The power she'd clung to for so long was slipping through her fingers, right there in front of everyone. Finally, David, the only board member who'd ever shown a shred of decency, leaned toward her, his voice strained. You have to address this. Show them the documents. Show them they're real. Her eyes flashed with anger. This meeting is out of order, she snapped. This is a witch hunt started by a man who broke the rules and put this entire community at risk. That's when I stood. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The room quieted on its own. I said, holding up my phone, "Is this your signature on the trespassing complaint you gave to the police?" I tapped the screen. A close-up of the forged document filled the room on the projector someone had brought. "And is this your car on my security footage the morning I got a fake violation?" I swiped to the next photo. The silence was heavy, every eye locked on her. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked down the table, desperate for backup. But the other board members avoided her gaze. Even Tom, her enforcer, kept his eyes on the floor. For the first time, looked small, isolated. The defiant mask crumpled, and with trembling hands, she gathered her papers. Without a word, she stood, turned, and walked out of the room. Gasps followed her, then whispers, then slowly applause. David stood, cleared his throat, and announced in a shaky voice, "Graves has submitted her immediate resignation as president of the board." The room erupted in cheers. For the first time in months, relief swept through me like fresh air. The rest of the meeting was a blur. Motions and votes flew by. The remaining board members, desperate to save themselves, agreed to everything. All fines against me rescinded. A formal apology to be posted on the HOA website and newsletter. An independent adjuster to assess the flood damage and pay for repairs out of the HOA reserve fund. It wasn't just victory, it was vindication. But as the crowd buzzed with energy, I realized something bigger. Removing wasn't enough. The system that gave her power needed to change. Because if one person could abuse it so completely, another could too. And that night, as neighbors clapped me on the back and whispered, "Thank you," I knew the fight wasn't over. It was just shifting to a new one where we had to rebuild trust, not just concrete. What would you do after winning a war you never wanted? After taking down the bully who nearly ruined your life? For me, victory wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something new. The morning after resignation, the neighborhood felt lighter. No more envelopes shoved under doors. No more nervous glances at street corners. But I knew it wasn't enough to celebrate. If the system stayed the same, someone else could step into her shoes one day. So with Maya and George at my side, we started to rebuild more than just a dam. We rebuilt the HOA itself. We drafted new bylaws. Simple, fair, transparent. Fines were capped at a reasonable amount, no more absurd $50,000 punishments. Every violation notice had to be backed with time-stamped photos. Surveillance cameras, banned from pointing at private property. And most importantly, every board meeting and financial record had to be open to all homeowners. No more secrets, no more power plays. The board voted. The changes passed. For the first time, the HOA felt like what it was supposed to be, neighbors protecting neighbors. And then, with a proper stamped county permit in hand, We rebuilt the dam. It wasn't just my project this time. George mixed concrete with me, his boots splattered with mud, sweat running down his forehead. Brought sandwiches and coffee, smiling for the first time in months. Even neighbors who had stayed quiet during the worst of it showed up to lend a hand or just say thank you. Maya oversaw the whole thing, measuring, double-checking, making small improvements to the design. Stronger reinforcements, better overflow channels. She signed off on every detail with her engineer's stamp. It wasn't just a dam anymore. It was a symbol. A symbol that no bully, no matter how loud, could erase the truth. The following spring, the rains came right on schedule. Heavy, steady, filling the gutters and pounding the roofs. I stood at my kitchen window, coffee in hand, watching the creek rise. My heart pounded like it had the first time, but this time I wasn't afraid. The water surged against the dam, slowed, diverted. The overflow channel carried the excess into the woods, and the yards, they stayed dry, not a single flower bed flooded, not a single shed lost. Maya came over with a couple of beers, her boots muddy from the walk. We stood on the back porch together, watching the water flow. She gave a small smile. She really thought she could bully a creek into submission. I laughed quietly, shaking my head. You can forge signatures, you can twist rules, but you can't vote against gravity. The truth is, the dam was never really about concrete and water. It was about people, about standing up when no one else will, about neighbors who find their voices when they realize they're not alone, about the quiet, stubborn strength it takes to keep fighting when the system tells you to sit down. I think about sometimes, about the smirk on her face when she thought she'd beaten me, about the silence in that clubhouse when the proof caught up with her. And I think about something my father used to say, bullies win until the day they don't. That day finally came for us. Now when I walk down the street, I don't feel eyes avoiding me. I see nods, waves, kids riding bikes without fear of being scolded. The neighborhood isn't perfect, it never will be, but it's ours again, free of fear. Sometimes late at night, I sit on the back porch and listen to the creek. The soft gurgle of water flowing over rock, the quiet hum of crickets in the distance. The steady peace of knowing that, for once, the water is exactly where it's supposed to be. And I think about all those months of fear, anger, and betrayal. About the forged documents, the flashing blue lights, the mud on my boots as I stood in the rain. And I realized something. Dignity doesn't always look like pride. Sometimes it looks like sacrifice. Sometimes it looks like standing your ground. And sometimes it looks like a dam that refuses to break, even when people try to tear it down. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next mystery on HOA Hunter Stories.